Hi Guy. Welcome back TV spoilers young, and the Restless reveal that Lily Winters didn't step into this the way an innocent person would. She stepped in the way someone does when they've been bruised too many times by loyalty, when they've watched the greater good get used as a weapon, and when they've learned that in Genoa City, fairness is often just a story people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. From the outside, it would look like she was preparing to do something dirty, something calculated, something that would put Kane Ashby exactly where Nikki Newman and Victor Newman wanted him. But inside Lily, nothing was clean or simple. It was a war of instincts, guilt clawing at her ribs, anger tightening her jaw, and a colder voice whispering that Kane had never played by the rules when it mattered. So why should she be the one to keep her hands clean now? She could feel how easily Nikki and Victor's plans could wrap around her, not because she was weak, but because they were experts at turning a person's conflict into momentum. They didn't just pressure you. They handed you reasons, just enough truth, just enough resentment, just enough righteous logic, until you practically pushed yourself off the ledge. At the same time, Claire Newman moved through the atmosphere like a sharp light. Her pop quiz wasn't just a moment. It was a threat in disguise. It carried the sensation that anyone lying could be exposed by one well-placed question, one pause held too long, one look that didn't match the story. Claire didn't have to raise her voice or accuse anyone outright. The mere fact that she could test loyalty, motives, and credibility at the worst possible time made everyone's careful scripts feel suddenly fragile. In a world where Victor controlled through fear and Nikki controlled through persuasion dressed as practicality, Claire represented another kind of danger, clarity. And clarity is lethal to people hiding something, but Lily couldn't stand outside the game and pretend she wasn't involved. Nikki was determined to make Lily part of the staged kidnapping plan, not because Lily was easy to manipulate, but because Lily was emotionally heavy enough to break Kane. That was the true cruelty of it. If Kane believed Lily and the twins were in danger, he wouldn't behave like a strategist negotiating terms. He'd become a father running on panic, desperation, and raw instinct. That desperation was the trap. And Lily, no matter how she tried to deny it, was the centerpiece of the trap. The guilt in Lily didn't vanish. It just got shoved down and buried under names like family, legacy, survival, and consequences. She told herself it was a fake kidnapping, that Victor wouldn't allow real harm, that everything was controlled. But guilt doesn't run on logic. It runs on images. The picture of Kane staring at his phone and going still. The thought of his breathing turning shallow, his mind spinning, his body moving before his brain could catch up because fear doesn't ask permission. Lily hated that she could imagine his helplessness so clearly. And because she could feel that guilt, she had to build another wall inside herself, one made of justification. Kane set his own rules. Kane hurt people. Kane took what he wanted and called it business, called it necessity, called it the price of power. So why should Lily be gentle when he never was? That was the most dangerous part, when guilt and entitlement existed in the same heart. Lily knew this was wrong, and at the same time she believed she had the right to do it. That contradiction made her sharper and more decisive, but also more vulnerable to Nikki and Victor's influence, because the Newmans had always been masters at turning moral confusion into action. They didn't have to threaten Lily. They only had to make refusal feel like betrayal of something bigger, and agreement feel like a distorted form of justice. Lily agreed to cooperate, not as someone forced into it, but as someone who walked willingly into the execution chamber of her own conscience. She aligned herself with Nikki, Chelsea Lawson, and Adam Newman in a web where each person carried a different kind of tension. Nikki had the ice-cold certainty of someone who believes power must be reclaimed at any cost, because otherwise the world will devour you. Chelsea had the sensitivity of someone who understands how thin the line is between a plan and trauma, but she kept moving anyway because loyalty and fear can be stronger than doubt. Adam was the most unstable piece, not because he was weak, but because he understood Victor's games better than anyone, and he knew a staged kidnapping could slide into something horrific with one tiny miscalculation. Then Kane Ashby received the terrifying message, a warning that Lily and the twins were in danger. That message didn't just deliver information. It delivered a heartbeat. It stole his ability to reason and replaced it with something older and more brutal, the panic of a man who can't protect what he loves. Kane read it again and again, as if staring hard enough could reveal the trick, as if he could find the seam where the lie was stitched. But everything about the message was designed to hit him where he was weakest, his family. And when a man is hit there, he stops being a chess player. He becomes prey. Kane's desperation didn't arrive as a dramatic scream. It arrived as suffocation. A moment of stillness in a room where the air suddenly felt too thin. A trembling hand around his phone. A mind racing fast enough to hurt, trying to identify who would do this, who could do this, who was powerful enough and ruthless enough to turn his family into leverage. And inevitably, Victor Newman's name rose like a shadow that didn't need light to exist. Kane understood the logic immediately. Victor wasn't merely trying to scare him. Victor wanted to force surrender. Victor wanted Kane to make a deal, to return everything, to hand back control, to swallow pride and call it compromise. Victor doesn't ask for what he believes is his. He takes it. And this time, he was taking it by placing a knife against Kane's heart without ever touching skin. Kane started chasing answers with a frantic speed of someone drowning. He called, he searched, he tried to build a map out of fragments. But the harder he fought for clarity, the deeper he sank into the very state the Newmans wanted him in, the state where the only thing that mattered was ending the fear. Because when someone is desperate, a deal stops looking like a trap and starts looking like a lifeline. When someone is desperate, they sign whatever is put in front of them, just to hear one sentence. They're safe. And on the other side of this, Lily felt herself being pulled backward by the force of Kane's panic. Every time she imagined him falling apart, a tightness squeezed her chest, like she was forcing a blade into the softest part of a man who once trusted her. She kept repeating that it would end quickly, that it was only meant to push Kane toward negotiations, that no one would be truly harmed. But guilt doesn't wait for the plan to finish. It arrives now, attaches itself to your breath, and refuses to let go. That was when Lily had to face the ugliest truth. She wasn't only helping the Newmans reclaim their empire, she was helping them prove that power could still bend other people's morality until it snapped. Claire's presence made everything worse. Her sudden test, her quiet scrutiny, turned every lie into a risk. It made people monitor their own expressions, their own timing, their own wording, because one wrong move could expose the whole machine. Claire didn't need to know everything. Sometimes all it takes is suspicion placed in the right spot. People with guilt will fill in the rest with their own panic. The Newman family was counting on one thing above all, Kane's desperation. They didn't need to crush him through direct force. They only needed to drive him to the edge and offer him a single path back, make a deal, and return what he took. It was a brutal strategy because it wore the mask of reason. If Kane gave them the empire, his family would be safe. If he resisted, the fear would continue. It turned Kane's choice into an impossible moral equation, power or family. But the true horror of this storyline wasn't simply the staged kidnapping. It was that everyone involved believed they were doing something necessary. Nikki believed she was protecting her family. Victor believed he was reclaiming what was stolen. Chelsea and Adam believed they were walking a thin wire for a greater purpose. Lily believed she was collecting a debt Kane had owed for a long time. And Kane believed that if he hesitated for even one heartbeat, he might lose everything. Kane moved toward the negotiation table with hollow eyes and shaking hands, driven by terror more than thought. And right when the Newmans believed they had him exactly where they wanted him, right when the trap was supposed to close, one tiny detail inside the update he received lodged itself like a splinter in his mind. Kane froze. The blood drained from his face. Because in that single detail was the first sign that this might not be only a staged kidnapping meant to force a signature, but a door that had opened into something none of them could fully control. Sienna didn't realize Noah's change began in one single moment. It seeped into their life like a thin fog, day after day, until breathing around him started to feel difficult. At first, it was only small irregularities, longer pauses in ordinary conversations, shorter answers that arrived too quickly, then the smooth pivot to another topic, as if a door inside him had quietly swung shut. Sienna had lived through Noah's stressful seasons before. She understood busy schedules, heavy responsibility, the way pressure can make someone more private, without meaning harm. But this time felt different. This time felt deliberate. It felt like Noah was choosing to conceal things, as if he were practicing secrecy, growing more skilled at it the more he did it. She didn't want to label him. She didn't want to turn suspicion into a verdict. But there is a kind of instinct that forms when you've been close to someone for too long, an instinct that catches the slightest shift in tone, timing, and distance. Noah was still there, still present in the shared space of their days, but his gaze kept drifting somewhere far away, as though he were calculating, weighing every step, every sentence, every expression. What frightened her more was that his privacy didn't look accidental. It looked like a habit forming at an unnatural speed. Sienna began to notice how often Noah carried his phone out of the room, out of the light, out of any place where she could read his face. He wasn't merely taking calls. He was taking them like he feared being seen. Sometimes the ringtone would barely begin, and Noah would already be rising, almost reflexively, retreating to a corner, lowering his voice until it felt like the sound itself had vanished. When he returned, he wasn't panicked, and he wasn't relieved. His expression carried something stranger, a calm that looked forced, like someone who had just crossed a hidden current without wanting anyone to know he almost went under. Sienna asked gently, in the lightest way she could manage, as if she only wanted to be sure he was okay. Noah always found an answer that sealed the subject shut. He avoided her questions with softness, with reassurance that sounded perfectly reasonable, and that perfectly reasonable tone chilled her most, because it felt less like honesty and more like a prepared script. Then the sudden trips began, and they felt like a second cut. Noah started disappearing in windows of time he used to explain, used to announce, used to mark with at least a small clue about where he was going and why. Now, everything happened fast, like a sharp turn made, without warning. He could leave within minutes of receiving a text, offering a vague reason so thin that if Sienna pressed, she would become the unreasonable one. That vagueness trapped her in a cruel position. If she stayed quiet, she punished herself with not knowing. If she spoke up, she feared becoming controlling, paranoid, the one who shattered trust with her own hands. Noah always came back. He always reappeared as if nothing had happened, but each return left Sienna with the same sick impression. That part of him had been gone too long and came home carrying the scent of danger, a scent he tried to wash away with calmness. Ever since Noah took over the shadow room, the mystery had grown sharper, almost multiplying by the week. The shadow room wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of new power in Noah's hands, a doorway into a world Sienna had never fully understood. Noah used to talk about the future, about responsibility, about what he wanted to build. But the deeper he stepped into this role, the more he seemed pulled into layers of activity that didn't belong in daylight. Sienna didn't dare claim certainty, yet she could feel the weight on him growing heavier, and it didn't feel like ordinary business stress. It felt like the strain of keeping secrets, of balancing forces, of maintaining a mask in front of eyes he couldn't predict. Noah owning the shadow room had changed the rhythm of everything, and that shift made Sienna suspect this wasn't merely busy or tense anymore. Sienna tried to convince herself that Noah was simply carrying more than he could admit, that the private calls were work issues he wasn't ready to share because he wanted to handle them alone. She told herself that anyone taking on a major responsibility might close off for a while, might need silence to make decisions. But the more she tried to soothe herself, the more her unease simply changed shape instead of fading. It became constant vigilance. Every time Noah reached for his phone, her body tensed. Every time he said he needed to step out, her heart sank. Every time he looked away while answering, a brutal, simple question rose inside her. What is Noah hiding, or who is he hiding? What hurt Sienna most wasn't the existence of secrets. It was the invisible distance Noah began building between them. It wasn't a wall made of anger or loud arguments. It was built out of "I'm fine," built out of careful reassurance, built out of kindness that was just enough to keep her from exploding, but never enough to let her touch the truth. Sienna found herself standing beside Noah the way you stand before a dark room with the door open, invited, technically, yet warned by something you cannot name not to step inside. Noah could still be gentle. He could still be attentive. He could still perform the ordinary rituals of life. But his feelings had retreated somewhere protected, somewhere she couldn't reach. Sienna began to fear that if she did nothing, this distance would become a habit, and once a habit forms, even love, no matter how strong, gets worn down by silence. Her worry wasn't only about losing Noah emotionally. It was about his safety. Because the secrets he carried didn't feel like harmless privacy. They felt like trouble. They felt like risk. They felt like the kind of involvement that could pull him outside the law or drag him into games where consequences are impossible to predict. Sienna had seen too many stories that began with quiet omissions and ended with wreckage. She was terrified Noah was walking that same path. First a call he won't explain, then an unannounced trip, then half-truths, and finally a collapse that arrives without warning. If Noah truly was caught in something off the books, then every day Sienna stayed silent was a day she stood closer to disaster without the power to stop it. She still tried to reach him in the gentlest way. She chose moments when Noah seemed softened, rare pockets of calm when she might pull him back into their shared reality. But Noah always slipped away. Not by storming out, not by raising his voice, by making her questions feel unnecessary. He kept answers short, tidy, final, then redirected to another subject, as if guiding her down a long corridor to avoid the door labeled truth. Sienna realized the more she asked, the more Noah withdrew. She was trapped in a painful paradox. If she stayed quiet, fear would eat her alive. If she asked, she feared she was pushing him farther. And Noah, somehow, made both choices hurt. Suspicion started shaping a version of Sienna she didn't recognize. She replayed details, stared at gaps in Noah's schedule, remembered the way his voice changed on certain calls, the way his eyes flicked toward the door as if he were always ready to leave. She hated the feeling of becoming someone who watches and measures. But she hated even more the feeling of being locked out of the life of the person she loved. She didn't want to convict Noah simply because he had become mysterious, yet she couldn't pretend things were normal when her instincts were screaming. Then, one day, Sienna accidentally stumbled onto a small clue. It wasn't the kind of evidence that exposed everything, and it wasn't clear proof that could lead to a neat conclusion. It was only a detail that didn't fit the ordinary shape of Noah's life, something that didn't belong with the vague explanations he kept using to calm her. But that was precisely why it was terrifying. Big secrets often show themselves through the smallest cracks. That clue made Sienna go cold, not because she suddenly knew everything, but because she now knew enough that she could never return to innocence. From that moment on, Noah's privacy gained a shape. His hidden calls gained weight. His sudden trips gained direction. And Sienna understood that if she remained still, she would become complicit in the fog, even though she never chose it. The tension reached its peak when Sienna realized Noah wasn't only distancing himself from her, but from the very things that used to soften him. He had grown harder in the way he controlled information, harder in the way he explained the world, as if he were living inside a secret structure that had to be protected at any cost. Sienna stopped sleeping well. Her questions echoed in her mind like footsteps in a dark hallway. She wondered who Noah was protecting, who he feared, what he was running from. She wondered if he had drifted into something off the books in the name of keeping the shadow room stable, in the name of power, in the name of survival in a world whose darker face she had never fully seen. And she wondered something even worse, whether Noah trusted her enough to let her step into that darkness with him, or whether he had decided she must remain outside for her own safety. In the end, Sienna knew she couldn't keep waiting for Noah to confess on his own. If the truth existed, it was being guarded by silence, and silence doesn't dissolve by itself. She decided to find out on her own, not because she wanted to control Noah, but because she couldn't love someone she no longer recognized. She didn't want to wake up one day and discover Noah had fallen off a cliff while she stood at a distance, too afraid of upsetting him to reach out. She prepared